I often wonder if there will ever be a full-size manned quadcopter. I'm not talking about crazy people making them in their sheds and flying them in a field outside their house. That has been done already to some extent. I'm talking about a full production aircraft that is perhaps using turbines or something like that can perform similar maneuvers to what we are used to with our RC quadcopters. I do think the technology is there, but it would be an extremely inefficient aircraft. However, I'd love to be able to go to an air show and see a full-sized quadcopter zooming past doing some crazy aerobatic stunts. I'd like to think that if someone did produce one, they would make it look something like this. This is the X252 quadcopter from GearBest.com. It is the upgraded model from the X251 Whirlwind, which I reviewed a couple of videos back on the channel. I think it will look really awesome, especially in this black colour, with a low swooping cockpit where the pilot can just about fit inside, much like a Lotus Elise. Until then, we have the RC versions, which are just as cool in my opinion. As mentioned, this model does seem to be an upgrade from the X251 quadcopter. However, it does not sport any carbon fibre like the last model, and it does not look as premium either with its plastic shell. However, in general, it does pack a lot more features, so let's take a look. The quadcopter itself is available in black or white. I have the black version. It's around the same size as the X251 at about 177mm. The quad has two headlights up front which are really bright, as well as a built-in 720p camera which transmits FPV and also records to a micro SD card in HD. The package also comes with a 4GB micro SD card which comes fitted out of the box underneath. The camera does point slightly down, but not too much. It's very similar to the H502S camera angle. The quad is very sporty looking. The arms have a dihedral, however this will not affect how the quadcopter flies like it would a plane, as the motors line up straight. I think this is a design feature to try and get the props out of the way of the camera as much as possible. It also looks pretty cool as well. The quad is using 1804 motors, which are bigger than the motors used in the X251. We might struggle to have the same amount of power, however. This is a fully 3D capable quad, mimicking a helicopter's collective pitch. So this quad can fly inverted, as it reverses the props in mid-air. In order to do this, the props have to be symmetrical, so that equal amounts of thrust is available in both directions. This causes a huge compromise when it comes to the efficiency of the prop, and I expect to have very little punch in comparison to the X251, but I will have to check that out in the test flight. The quad sits on its belly with some very tiny landing feet on the belly of the aircraft. There are also 4 LED lights underneath. Also underneath the quadcopter there is a giant gap. This is where the battery slots in. I'm sad to say that it is a proprietary battery, which inside is a 7.4 volt 950 mAh 2-cell LiPo, which is the same as the X251. This time we are given an adapter to charge, which slots onto the end of the battery and converts it into a balance plug. Again, there is no JST connector, so we are stuck with charging at 0.7 amps with the stock charger that charges from the balance plug alone. Also in the box is a screwdriver and a hex wrench, which can be used to remove the propellers and also change the mode of the transmitter, which I will show you later. This one, I am happy to say, does fit in its box with the propellers fitted. You need to put the screwdriver through the hole in the spinner and then twist the spinner round to remove it and then replace the props. We are given 2 sets of props in total. You are also given a micro SD card reader and of course the charger, which as mentioned charges via the balance port, as well as a charging cable to charge the FPV monitor. The FPV monitor is pretty neat, as it is a bit more premium than I am used to. This package is definitely hobby grade and not toy grade. You are given a dipole antenna which screws into the top of the FPV monitor. You could swap this to something else, such as a cloverleaf antenna to get better range. However, you would also need to do the same on the quad, which has no visible antenna on the outside of it. There is a slot for the DC jack to charge the monitor, as well as a button on the back which does cycle through a few different 5.8 GHz channels. Inside the FPV monitor is a 1-cell LiPo, so you won't get the longest of battery life out of it, however it will be enough for a few flights. The on-screen display of the monitor does tell you the battery voltage of the monitor, which helps. It also tells you the 5.8 GHz frequency that you have selected. As far as I can tell, the quadcopter only transmits on the one frequency, so I'm not sure why we have been given the option to change the channel, but it is nice anyway. The FPV screen comes with a sunscreen attached to it, which is useful. I'm happy to see that the FPV screen goes to snow once the signal has been lost, rather than blue screen, which is very helpful for FPV. That brings me neatly onto the transmitter, which the FPV monitor attaches to using a pre-fitted bracket. The transmitter is the X7, which is the same one that is used with the X251 aircraft. So it has the option to switch the mode of the aircraft from mode 2 to mode 1. You do this by turning the 4 screws on the back of the transmitter clockwise to clamp down the throttle stick, and counterclockwise to release the clamps on the opposite stick. The transmitter requires 6 AAA batteries, which is the only part of this transmitter that is not hobby grade. For the rest, we have proper hobby grade gimbals and switches, as well as a programmable on-screen display. I'm interested in switching the programming of the transmitter to mode 1, so I need to lower the mode 2 throttle, as it's now spring loaded, and then press the mode and back button at the same time. This takes us into a secret menu where you can use the circle dial to where it says mode, and then press down on the circle dial. You can now move left or right and select the desired mode. Then press back to the main menu. I found that switching modes required the sticks to be recalibrated. To do this, you turn off the transmitter and then back on again while holding down the left trim. Move the sticks around to their full maximum range a few times and then hold down the trim button again. The transmitter should reboot and you will see that the sticks are using the maximum throw through the on-screen display. Of course, that is apart from the throttle, which we will look at in a bit. Let's take a look at the controls. Probably the most important switch is the top right one. This quad does not have an arming sequence, so as soon as the transmitter is bound to the aircraft, the motors can potentially spin up. That is unless the throttle hold, also known as the throttle kill switch, is engaged. You will tell if it's engaged as the throttle slider on the display won't move when the throttle is moved. Flip the switch the other way around and you will notice the throttle move on the on-screen display. That is when the quad's props will start if you have the quad connected to its battery. The switch below that is the dual rate switch. In the top position you have 80% rates, and in the bottom position you have 100% rates. You can also boost that up to 125, which I will show you how to do later. On the left shoulder we have the non-collective pitch mode at the back, which they call 6G mode, and the switch in the forward position is collective mode, also known as idle up. Both throttle hold and idle up terms come from collective pitch helicopters. Confusingly, the switch underneath that is also called the 6G and 3D switch. 6G is stability mode and 3D is full acro mode. I found a slight problem with the sequence of these switches and modes. If you put the aircraft into idle up mode but then leave the flight mode in 6G, the aircraft will fly full throttle into the sky, so you really need to avoid mixing those two modes together. For acro only mode, you want the idle up switch in the back position and the 6G and 3D switch in the down position. Then from there, to give the quad full collective 3D, you can enable the idle up switch. But to stay in 6G mode, the idle up needs to be in the off position and the flight mode in the 6G position. So to be clear, the idle up switch should never be selected when the quad is in 6G mode. Always keep a trigger finger on the throttle kill switch when playing around with these modes for the first time. There's one other button on the transmitter that is active this time around. That is the big red button which starts and stops video recording via a short press. You can take a photo by doing a long press as well. The last thing to sort out is that reduced throttle. First put the transmitter switch into 6G mode and ensure that the throttle hold switch is off. Then long press the mode button and cycle down to the throttle curve. On the 5th curve we want to make sure that the figure says 100%. Now do the same for the 3D mode by flicking the switch and everything should read 100 on throttle curve 5. After that, scroll up to where it says dual rate and flip the rate switch into the up position. You will see that each of the channels is limited to 80% throw. Flip the switch to the down position and they will say 100. For every axis, I have moved mine to the maximum of 125 to get the best flip and roll rate. That is pretty much it. Let's go and take it for a fly. I'm taking off in full Acro mode here, and I haven't yet started the video recording on the quadcopter. This is the Fat Shark DVR footage, and the reason for that is I want you to see the slight frame rate drop that you get when I enable recording, which is now. So there is a slight frame rate drop. However, I noticed that before it starts recording, there is a lower frame rate than you would expect from, say, a normal FPV cam. It is manageable though. As you can see, I'm able to do rolls and flips no problem. So the camera footage is pretty good. This is the footage that has been recorded on the quadcopter, and it is about the same as the Hubsan H252S that I recorded previously, as I do a backflip there. So I think people are going to be buying this quad for a couple of reasons. The first one is the full Acro mode. So it does have full Acro mode, unlike the X251, which I reviewed previously. And as I do a roll there, it seems that I have attracted a K9 here. I can never escape this on this field, but I'm just showing you the difference there between the recorded footage on board and the DVR. So this is what I'm actually flying with. You can see a little bit of breakup and also a frame rate drop, but it is flyable. It's not bad at all. And one thing that I noticed is that this thing is tuned better than the X251, but it does cost a lot more. So the X251 I think currently sits at about £84. This one is £127, but you do get a lot more with it. So of course we have the camera on board, which is recording in 720p at the same time as relaying its FPV footage back to the pilot. We also have a FPV monitor, which is pretty impressive for the price. Now, one thing that I did notice is that if you look at the top right hand corner of the screen there, we have a black line, and that is where the wide angle lens is showing in the picture slightly. It's not a problem for me, and you could crop it out if you like, but that is something to consider. So this again is the footage that has been recorded on board, and I flick there to the DVR footage from the Fat Shark because I want to show that the range is pretty good on this. I had no problems flying around this field whatsoever, and this field is 120 meters long, so that is good news. And of course that is using the stock antenna there. I am using my Fat Shark goggles to record this footage, but I did use the stock dipole antenna that they give you, and it is plenty. I have no problems with the footage at all. So there again, I'm flicking between the DVR footage and the onboard footage. It is a lot smoother to the onboard footage. One thing that I did find as I did a backflip there, and this is kind of a problem in general for this quadcopter, is that this camera has a very limited wide dynamic range, or should I say it's got a very limited dynamic range, because when I did a backflip and the quadcopter faced the ground went completely black and I wasn't able to see the footage correctly, and there's a slight moment there where I'm wondering whether I'm going to hit the ground or not, and that kind of became a problem in 3D mode. So what I was hoping to get from this quadcopter was a FPV experience that I could fly in 3D, so I could fly upside down, but that kind of wasn't the case, because with that slight frame rate drop on the video feed, as well as the low dynamic range, I was finding it difficult to fly in complete collective pitch 3D mode, and that is what I'm trying to do here. I did a couple of flips, but it kind of really wasn't working out. I was finding it hard to see where the ground was, so I come in for a landing here, and I'm going to flip to some other footage, and I'm flying line of sight here, and I was able to do some 3D flying, so I'm flying completely inverted here, and it was awesome. I really enjoyed it. It looks a little bit wobbly on the screen here, but when I was flying line of sight, it looked completely dialed in, and it was so much fun. My 3D skills are a little bit rusty, but I was getting there in the end. I think a lot of 3D pilots will be wondering, is it possible to do TikToks with this? Now, for those who don't know, TikToks rely on a very quick forward and backwards pitch, and it kind of makes the quadcopter slash helicopter look like it's defying gravity. That requires a lot of torque, which of course this quadcopter does not provide. You see, a collective pitch helicopter, for the most part, has its motor running at the same RPM, and then the blades change the pitch, and that is where the quick movements are able to happen for you to be able to do those TikTok maneuvers. Now, with this quadcopter, when you get to the 50% mark on the throttle, the propellers are quickly reversing direction, and there is a loss of power that goes on in that transition, which of course doesn't happen with a collective pitch helicopter. So you can't really do TikToks, but you can do some pretty cool maneuvers, some pretty cool inverted flying and flips and rolls. One thing I forgot to mention is that the video recorder on board does record sound. It's not very good, it's a little bit droney, if you pardon the pun. The flight time is about 8 minutes, which is slightly shorter than the X251, but it is still respectable for the features that it packs. So there you go, that is my review of the X252 quadcopter. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll put a link in the description if you wish to purchase it. As always, please continue to subscribe. Cheers.